Hi everybody. I thought since the first video on my aunt's Plymouth was successful, I thought I'd tell you a little bit more about that side of the family. My aunt and my grandmother, and of course my mother and her two sisters and brother. It goes way back to my grandmother meeting my grandfather, and they're both immigrants. That worked out well. They married early in the century, in the 1900s, and they had five children. My granddad was a glass blower, and he evidently did very well at it, although he never brought home anything from the factory that he made. So we really have no keepsakes of his activity at the factory. Evidently made ornamental glass, and he died early. He died of a cerebral hemorrhage, and back in those days, they really didn't do much diagnostics or autopsies to determine exactly how people died. But he just keeled right over, and that was it. So he left five children. My grandmother had to make do, and she got a job in a knitting mill and worked there into her 80s, believe it or not, and until the mill eventually closed. My aunt, who I had that famous 48 Plymouth, she had a job at the hosiery mill. Back during World War One, right around that time, my aunt and my mom both got the so-called Spanish flu, and it almost killed my aunt. My mom wasn't as sick. They both recovered, but that was a tremendous widespread contagion that killed lots and lots of people. And it was hysteria surrounding it. People didn't know how it was spread. They didn't know if large groups would be subjected to it if they were at a theater or something. So it was really very traumatic. And eventually that plague moved on. And so the family was left to kind of fend for themselves during the Depression. It was really bad. My mom had a job as a secretary. My aunt had a job in a hosiery mill. Another aunt of mine died in infancy, and you will find this odd, I think. She died choking on a peanut. That was before the Heimlich maneuver, obviously, and she died as a baby. And my uncle, he survived for many years. He did okay. He worked at a manufacturing plant, and so they survived the Great Depression. It was a tough road, I'll tell you. And uh, after those bad years, my aunt continued to continued to work at the hosiery mill, and I remember going down there when I would visit in the summer and stay a week at the house. I would go down to the mill and wait for her to come to her car when it was time to go. So then I got a ride up the street. It was about 5 blocks away from the house, and that house is on a tremendous hill. And back in the 20s, there was a trolley car that plied the streets of that hill, and it ran away, and the brakes failed, and wound up derailing itself at the bottom of the hill, and went right into a store there at the bottom. And the family was living at the base of the hill at the time, and just barely missed my mom. So she was afraid of hills for the rest of her life. Anyhow, My aunt worked through the war and had this 48 Plymouth. Eventually, she got a 49 Ford rather, and I have the keys to that, just like I have the keys to the 48 Plymouth. And here they are. Here's the ignition key, and here we go. It has a modernistic car on it, which I doubt this can will pick up, but there is a modernistic car on it, and kind of an idea car. There you can, well, it kind of looks like a jet plane. And then the trunk key, which is right there. So it has the Ford emblem on it. There we go, Ford emblem. And more of these disabled vehicle tags. So, okay, a little bit more about the 49 Ford. It was something else to steer. I was used to steering 48 Plymouth. The 49 Ford with that flathead V8 was quite different. It took a lot more muscle. It was, of course, standard transmission, no overdrive, and it was a black four-door sedan. And my aunt got it used from another lady in the community, and she drove that for many years. The only repair that I remember in that 49 Ford was eventually a water pump. Otherwise, it performed perfectly. So now we have my aunt driving the 49 Ford, and tell you a little bit more about her. Uh, she took care of my grandmother. She never married. Took care of my grandmother. Lived there at the house. And my grandmother, as I say, worked at the mill through her 80s. And believe it or not, she lived to be 100. And she had a stroke at about 93. She was a gifted individual. She never went to high school, as far as I know. I don't know how far she made it in school back in those days. Uh, School attendance was kind of sketchy, and but she could do math problems. You had a math problem, a string of numbers to add. She could do that in her head instantaneously. Unbelievable. She also played the piano without any instruction, all by ear, perfectly. So a gifted individual. She was the kind of person at the mill where everybody went to her for advice. And so she, I think, uh, did very well in that role. And she did a great job raising her kids. Um, my aunt took care of her as she had that stroke. And in addition, the difficult thing for my grandmother is that she was a great talker. She loved to talk. And when she had that stroke, she had to hunt for words and kind of rehabilitate herself. And she also had paralysis on the one side. She overcame the paralysis at 93, and she was a talker again, but it would take her time. And she got mad when she was trying to find a word, but she would still be talking and communicating. Oddly enough, in her ninth decade, she developed breast cancer, which was very surprising to me that it attacks that late in life. And she eventually she had a breast removed, but she eventually died of that disease. And my aunt took care of her that whole time at the house. Now, I would go up visiting my aunt during the summer and stay there for a couple of weeks. And when I went up there, I got some information from the neighbors that say, Jack, your aunt is having problems, and looked like what she was doing was she was trying to pay bills twice, Fortunately, it's a small town and nobody took advantage of her. But that was the beginning of the knowledge that there was something wrong. And so looked into it, and she was starting to get forgetful and really bad. And so I got an evaluation done, and it was clear that she was in the beginning stages of Alzheimer's. My cousin, fortunately, since I lived 1,000 miles away, my cousin was able to get live-in person and actually people to they changed the shifts, to watch over her, and so eventually she was able to stay at home for a long period of time, even suffering as much as she did from limited memory. And but when my cousin came by the house one day, she she saw that my aunt had all her bags packed, and she said, "Well, why do you have your bags packed?" She said, "Well, I'm going home." She said, "Well, you are home." And she said, "No, I'm not." And so my cousin knew at that point staying at home was not really beneficial because my aunt didn't even realize where she was. Um, when given the opportunity, she would ask for her mother, my grandmother, who had died, like 10 years before. So she eventually went to the nursing home. And when I go up there, I stop by the nursing home and see how she was. And believe me, at her final stage, I mean, they really tried at the nursing home, but very limited what you can do. And she had lost weight. She really wasn't eating, and she was just making noises. So I tried talking to her, and she would just make noises and look straight ahead. Every once in a while, she'd look over in my direction, kind of like, what's that distraction over there? What's that noise that I hear over there? And so this is a quite quite a change from the days when she was best friends with me and teaching me to drive, and here she is, doesn't recognize me, or it just really hits you hard. And she eventually passed away, but I'll never forget her and the great memories that I had. So thanks for listening.